Greetings, welcome to 3D Lanes number 18. This episode we'll be talking about GMT watches. I am Denny Lanes. I am your host, and today we're diving into one of horology's most fascinating inventions, the GMT watch complication. Whether you're a frequent traveler, an aviation enthusiast, or just someone who loves the artistry of mechanical watches, the GMT complication has likely crossed your radar. But where did the GMT come from? Why was the GMT created? And how has it evolved over time? Well, in this episode, we'll be discussing all this stuff, the history behind GMT watches. We'll be exploring their technical innovations and discuss how they become the icons of global travel. Uh, Let's begin with the origins of time zones and early dual time watches. So, if we start obviously at the beginning, before GMT watches were even a concept, humanity had to grapple with the idea of standardizing timekeeping. For centuries, time was local, meaning it was dictated by the position of the sun. So, based on where the sun was in the sky, you would know what time, or you would estimate the time, what time it was. But as railroads and telecommunication networks expanded in the 19th century, it became clear that a universal system was needed to avoid confusion. Here's where Greenwich Mean Time enters. Greenwich Mean Time equals GMT, which was established as the global reference point during the International Meridian Conference in 1884. While the GMT solved many problems for global communication and transportation, it definitely did not, or it didn't immediately lead to a wearable solution for tracking multiple time zones. Early attempts dual time pocket watches appear in the late 19th century, but these were very bulky and very impractical, so that's why they didn't stick. These design these designs use two separate movements housed in a single case. It was clever but overly complex solution, meaning you had a watch with what I said, two movements in it. So it had to be definitely big, not like the stuff that we see today. The real breakthrough came much later when aviation introduced new challenges for timekeeping. Pilots needed to coordinate across multiple time zones during long flights. This demand set the stage for what would eventually become the GMT complication we know today. Let's move to part number 2, the jet age and why GMT watches were created. Let's fast forward to the mid 20th century. The jet age had arrived. In 1952, British Overseas Airways Corporation launched a non-stop jet service from London to Johannesburg. This marked a new era of rapid international travel. Suddenly, crossing multiple time zones wasn't just an occasional thing. It was becoming a routine for pilots and passengers alike. This posed a unique problem for pilots who needed to track both local and GMT or Greenwich Mean Time simultaneously for navigation and coordination purposes. Airlines like Pan American Airways or Pan Am recognized this challenge and approached watchmakers for solutions. Two major innovations emerged around this time: the Glycine Airman in 1953 and the Rolex GMT Master in 1954. Glycine's Airman was inspired by conversations with American pilots who wanted a watch capable of showing two time zones at once. It featured a rotating bezel with 24-hour markings, a simple but effective way to track additional time zones. But it was Rolex GMT Master that truly revolutionized watchmaking. It developed It was developed in collaboration with Pan Am pilots. Rolex introduced a fourth hand, a 24-hour hand, that worked alongside a rotating bezel with red and blue markings known as the Pepsi bezel. See, that's where it comes from. This intuitive design allowed pilots to track Greenwich Mean Time while adjusting their main hour hand to local time at their destinations. The GMT Master wasn't just functional, it was stylish and robust, featuring Rolex signature oyster case and luminous markers for visibility during flights. The red signified the daytime and the blue signified the nighttime, something that we still see today in the current iterations of the same watch. Part 3, technical innovations and how GMT watches work. Now that we've covered why GMT watches were created, we can talk about how they work and why they're so versatile. The classic GMT configuration includes 3 key elements. A standard hour hand that tracks local time. Well, and I would argue, right? You can lump all the hands in the first category. So meaning a standard hour hand, a minute hand, and a second hand, just like any time only watch would have. A fourth hand, often brightly colored, that rotates once every 24 hours. This is number 2. And number 3, a bezel with 24-hour markings that can be rotated to track additional time zones. Okay, here's how you use it. First, you set your main hour hand, meaning the time only hand, using the crown. Then you adjust the GMT hand to display home time or any other preferred time zone that you may want against the bezel markings. And if you need to track a third zone temporarily, you simply rotate the bezel without changing the hands. And this is how the usual GMT watch works. There are modern implementations that have refined this functionality even further. And we have 2 categories here. The Flyer or Traveler GMT, like those in the Rolex GMT Master 2, that allow you to adjust your hour hand independently when changing local time zones. And these are perfect for frequent travelers. This specific type of GMT has been democratized a little, maybe not a little, maybe a lot lately with the development of the Miyota movement that allows for a Flyer GMT to be more affordable. Before, it was mostly Rolex, Tudor, or the big brands that would have one of these. The other iteration of the GMT is a collar GMT, that on the other hand, it lets you set the GMT hand independently. So this is ideal for tracking distant zones from home. So as the name implies, it's a collar GMT. So if you're keeping track of a time zone, let's say I'm in the US, PST, Pacific Standard Time, and then I have family in Europe, I can track their time. So that allows me to check the time they're in, and if I decide to call them, right, call a GMT or send them a message or anything, I know that it's more likely for them to answer or to check the message depending on the time. There's versions of this collar GMT like the Oak and Oscar, Humboldt GMT. Then there's Christopher Ward uses a lot of these Alita movements that are collar GMTs. Nothing wrong with that. I've traveled with the Oak and Oscar Humboldt, and it's the only thing is you need to track the time zone that you're traveling to with the GMT hand, which to me is not a big deal. I can look at it. It takes me maybe one more second to realize what time it is, but it's not a big deal. You get used to after a few days, and it's not a big deal. I know people can discriminate these collar GMTs, but they're equally functional. And despite the simplicity, one limitation persists. There's the non-standard time zones with half-hour or quarter-hour offsets, like India or Nepal. India is plus 5:30, and Nepal is like plus 5:45. that 45 interval or that half an hour interval can't be precisely tracked using traditional GMT bezels. Part 4, challenges and cultural impact. While incredibly practical, GMT watches aren't without their challenges. And as I mentioned earlier, tracking non-standard offsets is very tricky, and it kind of requires mental math rather than at a glance solution. Technical issues uh, have also come up over the years, with certain movements experiencing slipping or synchronization problems between the hour and GMT hands. However, these issues are rare and typically resolved by high quality manufacturers. But here's what makes GMT watches truly special, and it's that they're more than just tools. They're cultural icons. Rolex colorful bezels like the Pepsi red and blue or the Coke black and red have become symbols of international travel and adventure, and you see everybody technically copying these color schemes. And when I started collecting, I don't know if I'm a collector per se, but I would like to say I'm a hoarder of watches because I don't flip them. I don't know. As soon as I buy a watch, I consider it mine. So I never consider it. I never consider selling them. It's more like, I take the hit of whatever it costs if it's used or new. Not that I'm rich or anything, but my watch purchases are very well thought, but and with intention. But where was I going with this? I'm rambling over here, but yeah. When I started, back to my story. Sorry. When I started, I was kind of like against the Rolex aesthetic, not because mainly because I didn't see anything original. Everybody was copying Rolex. There was really nothing original in design. I was at the beginning. I was against the Seiko Turtle, mainly because the markers were round. Little did I know that a lot of dive watches have round hour markers. But I found the Samurai back then, and that was one of my first watches, and so on. Now I'm not against Rolex. I understand their position in history and how they're pretty much everywhere every time you look at watch history, which is really, really interesting. But today, nearly every major watchmaker offers their own interpretation of the GMT complication, from classic designs that honor tradition to bold modern takes that push boundaries. Uh, let's see who is interesting. The interesting ones like Tipsim. That they have a module that they developed for. I don't remember what watch movement they use, but it's like, I don't know if it's a Patek or what is the brand? It's either a Patek or it's escaping me, but it's a type of GMT that you can hide the the GMT hand behind the hour hand, and if you don't want to use it, it just doesn't show, which is really, really clever. So yeah, props to Tipsim for doing it that way. I think Arkin also has a different way to do it with a Miyota module that they developed before the actual Miyota uh, GMT movement came out, and they have a display of showing basically uh, when is day and when is night. I haven't handled an Arkin watch, but that's how I understand from what I've seen. Part 5, closing thoughts. So, what makes GMT watches so enduring? It's their perfect blend of practicality and symbolism, a tool designed for global connectivity that also represents freedom and exploration. From the origins in aviation to their modern day status as horological icons, GMT watches remain relevant in our increasingly interconnected world. Whether you're crossing continents or just dreaming of faraway places, there's something undeniable romantic about wearing a piece of history on your wrist. I also think that they're very useful, uh, especially now because supply chains are so interconnected. And as of this recording, meaning I'm recording this in April of 2025, and tariffs are taking place in the U.S. So I don't know if the intention is to move a chunk of or a huge part of the supply chain back to the U.S. But nowadays supply chains are extremely interconnected, and a lot of times you have to make calls to the other side of the world, and it's always useful to have a GMT, a collar GMT on your wrist. I'm not gonna deny that. I mean, it's I if I don't have a GMT, if I'm not wearing a GMT that day, I check my phone to see what time what's the time on the time zone that I want to call. And a lot of times I'm tracking 3 or 4 time zones, so many times the GMT might not be enough. So it's a lot of romanticism with the usefulness of the complication. But that wraps up today's episode. If you enjoyed this dive into horological history, make sure to subscribe to Three Lanes Podcast wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a review. Next week, we'll be touching on a different topic, and I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate your time. See you next time.